In Zimbabwe, where I was born, every afternoon during summer, it would bucket down. So one day when I was about 6, I saw a small black child recede through the back window of my dad's car as she walked alone in this torrential rain. And Dad had been a bomber pilot in World War II. And sitting on his knee as a child, he'd reflected that he'd rained bombs on little girls just like me. My best friend at the time lived in Boston, USA. She populated the pages of a treasured, old and tattered book that told the stories of her daily life. So on Christmas Day, she stood before a glittering, snow-laden tree, and I sat in the dust of my African home and was transported, because stories are complex and curious and evocative and ambivalent, and we're designed to respond to them. They charge us with emotion and test our resilience. So I was deeply envious of the perfect, idyllic life of my Boston friend. And then I grew up and realized it as the power of story to frame perception. And my dad's tragic reflections stirred empathy and later distress at what we impose on children through our ongoing negligence, war among it. And that little wet girl and the life I imagined for her caused me deep shame. You see, our personal stories matter. They sculpt our life's experience. And in business, they describe the culture and the purpose that directs it. So these childhood recollections, each of them would become a square in a patchwork of events that would compel me to go online in 2008 and take action. And that's impacted on the lives of thousands of people every year since. My first hesitant steps into the online space were absolutely terrifying. It's a predatory creature, it's voracious. It gobbles up your time and your energy and your money. And it's muddy with misconception because there are merchants at every corner peddling their methods with the zealotry of the converted. First among them, that success online can be measured by how many people like, link to, and follow you, unless you're selling franc. And I was captaining my own exploration through this uncharted territory. And so I was easy prey. But really, as a mandate for doing good business, I thought it was badly misplaced energy, because real connections are just not so random. They're cause-related and intent-driven. And the vehicle is story, and the driver is clarity. If clarity is an elusive creature, curiosity is its best friend. I love the online space for so many reasons, not least of all because it unleashed an insatiable curiosity. I learned from a talk called The Brain in Love by Helen Fisher that certain cells in the brain activate dopamine. It's a chemical responsible for desire and motivation and ideas. It literally lights the brain up like a New Year's firework display. Addictive drugs release dopamine. Romantic love releases dopamine. So does everything you want. Now that's a revelation. Like what you want, what you desire, what gets you out of bed in the morning is determined by what you want, although you don't always know it until you have an idea. So decades later, the memory of that small wet girl of my childhood shame was reawoken when my aunt came to visit from South Africa in 2008. She told me that she regularly bought blankets so that she could give them out to children she found alone and cold on the side of the road, often at night. Now that is a confronting reality. I'd like you to imagine that happening here. We were deeply shocked. Coincidentally, my mother had just made me this blanket knitted out of squares. So I popped the idea. I could go online and I could ask the knitters of the world if they would knit and send a square to my aunt in South Africa so that she could make blankets rather than buy them to warm these desperate children. The idea was clear. Was it yet a burning desire? No. If I was to ask the knitters to act, they needed to understand why. So I started to research. Completely staggering statistics consumed me with despair. I learned that a child loses a parent at every 15 seconds, and that there are 25 million orphaned, abandoned, and abused children because of HIV/AIDS and poverty and stigma and government inaction, and most of them live in Southern Africa. What was to change the idea to a focused intention and the despair to a driving desire? Well, it was a story that I found online told by a man called Stephen Lewis, who had been the United Nations Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS to Africa, about a young girl that had been recently orphaned. He said he'd witnessed many such stories before, but that few had left him in such disarray. And that as she told of the death of her mother just a few days before, this little girl wept copiously and uncontrollably. It was as if her weeping plumbed the depths of the sea. Her tears didn't just flow, they gushed. They soaked her sweater and ran down her skirt. And for a moment in time, it was as if this young girl was the pandemic incarnate. Now my brain lit up. Together with my family, we had a burning desire. We wanted to make a difference in the lives of these children. We wanted to raise awareness of this unheralded human tragedy. We wanted to corral that online beast and make it work to build a massive global community that would work to warm and comfort these children. And we leapt out of bed every single day to act on this desire. Now, you might be wondering how this relates to you and your business. Well, it does, because there's no difference in wanting for a cause and wanting for a business purpose. Roy Spence, an adherent of the emerging conscious capitalism movement, and author of It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For, says that when business is at its best, it looks for love and for friends, because then it can play to its strength for the purpose of serving the greater good. Do we look for friends in business? Absolutely. We want to work for and with people who love us and share what we do with others. Love, and yes, in a metaphorical sense, because if you serve people so well you eliminate their pain, they'll love you for it. They'll join your clan. A clan shares a common intention. Because they believe what you believe, they get why you believe what you believe. And that manifests trust, which is the mainstay of a community of loyal friends. So, if we have clarity of intention and desire, what sits at the intersection that communicates the common belief and builds trust? Well, it's story. When I started work decades ago, no one told real story. But today, TED Talks have blazed a trail, and blogging has reawakened the storytellers, and we don't have to question it anymore with the thought, is this allowed? So if Stephen Lewis's story could change my life in an afternoon, could telling stories about the orphans and their carers and the issue and why we were doing this and the knitters and their work create the same magic? I bought the domain knittersquare.com and started, and for the next 2 years, I told the stories. As the knitters found our site, we served these good people well. We made it easy for them to contribute to Knit and Send the Squares, and we worked very hard to foster their friendship and their love by sharing the communal story. So when a few parcels arrived at my aunt's home in South Africa, we wrote of our terrific excitement, and we shared with them her early efforts to gather volunteers to open some of the parcels and to sort the squares. We told them that it would likely be the grandmothers who had buried their own children and were sole carers of their grandchildren who we would get to band together to sew the blankets. We shared with them their own terrific, fantastic, creative and compassionate craft work. And then we took them on the journey into the sprawling and sometimes dangerous shack settlements as my aunt and her volunteers navigated their way in there to find hundreds of these little tiny daycare centres that have been set up to look after the needs of these desperate children. And every time they wrapped a blanket around a child's tiny shoulders, they would say, "You're unique and you're special and you have a role to play in your country." Our stories served our intention well and built trust. And soon, the trickle of parcels arriving in my aunt's South African home turned into a deluge. And it has stayed that way ever since. And now, tens of thousands of knitters from 55 countries around the world send hundreds of thousands of squares which drip off every surface in rainbow colours, and they've made tens of thousands of blankets to warm tens of thousands of children. Because for this massive exploding community, the squares became a currency of hope. Soon it wasn't just our stories that fueled the flames. Businesses and corporations and hundreds of schools joined in. We even heard from sailors on the mighty aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, about their knitting club on board. That's a heartwarming juxtaposition, warriors of the sea knitting for orphans half a world away. The stories had worked their magic. You know, it's a measure of a good community that it can run itself. And now for the last 5 years, that's exactly what it's done. This simple program has been an inspirational teacher to absolutely everyone who was involved. It's taught us that the internet can be used to harness compassion and galvanize action. And that if you have clarity of intention, the stories you tell will ignite passion and gather community. And truly what we can do with such community is yet to be imagined. It taught me to listen for story and revealed that everyone is a great storyteller when it matters. And that, like these tales that I'm about to share with you, very likely every single one of you in this room has a story that could change other people's perceptions or hold a mirror up to their soul or compel courage and inspire action. I have a friend, she's a curator of a medical museum. She told a group of visiting school children about a story about our intestinal immune system. She said, "It's like an army at rest until you eat your cruciferous vegetables, like cauliflower, and then it goes on alert." She painted this humorous and evocative picture of our courageous little cell soldiers going into action to hunt down and destroy invading pathogens. And then she held up a slide of an actual bowel cancer tumour and said, "You see," it looked a bit like a cauliflower, and she said, "You see, if you don't eat your cauliflower, your body might grow one for you, and it won't be one you'll want." And I said, "You must tell that story online, because if people truly understand why they should eat cauliflower, it could save lives." I was working with a woman who had to do a short 5-minute talk. I said to her, "Well, what matters to you?" And she said, "Every day I get up and I think, what's mine to own in this moment, in this time?" Wow. I asked her, Do you have a story that shapes that belief? She said, yes, it was when I went back to South Africa 7 years ago and learned that a young girl known to me had been raped. She was only 9. And because there was no one to look after her, she'd been sent back to school. And she said, I knew I had to act because of the danger of HIV/AIDS infection and the damage that would have been done to her small body and tiny mind. And so she told me she borrowed a car and drove into one of those shack settlements to find the school that the child was at, where she faced a hostile group of male disbelieving teachers and demanded to take the child out of school into a hospital nearby where people lay dying in the corridors. And she insisted that this child was examined and given antiretroviral drugs. And she said that every single moment of that experience, her knees were shaking and she was absolutely terrified. But she did what she had to do in that moment, in that place. And now that young girl is 16 and HIV/AIDS free. And she started her own enterprise, gathering pieces of cloth and little bits of soap so that she can hand them out to orphan children in the streets so that they can wash themselves. It's an amazing story. And every day since I've heard it, I've wondered, not could I or should I, but would I? Would you? Will this story pop into your mind if ever you find yourself in a place where you have to act in that moment and in that place? And finally, a young woman shared her story with us and saved our granddaughter's life. She'd given birth without any warning 15 weeks early, and she told our daughter, who was 20 weeks pregnant and so troubled by the similar symptoms, she went to a reluctant doctor and insisted on a medical test that revealed she was in imminent danger of losing her baby. We were within a hair's breadth of never meeting this precious child. So our gratitude for this story is lifelong. And now I tell the story online because who knows when it might prompt a similar action and save another precious child. And this is why our stories matter. This is what it takes to lead online. The courage to step into the space, to harness all your brilliant ideas, and then invest in the hard work of clarity, to focus to a single driving intention, because that will fan desire. And then unearth your personal and business and communal stories and blog about them, because a post doesn't gather dust like a book on a bookshelf or disappear into cyberspace. It's there for as long as we live in a world to power the internet. So take your stories online to find the people who most need and want to hear them. Spark their interest and ignite their passion and foster the connections so that you can work together for the greater good. Because then how might your stories change your life or the lives of people you love, or change the lives of others for the better? How might your stories even save lives? Thank you.